What's the most intellectual joke you know? A Calvinist dies and goes to heaven. At the pearly gates, he sees two lines. One for predestination and one for free will. Being a good Calvinist, he goes to stand in the predestination line. After waiting in line for what could have been years, the person at the desk asks, "Why are you here?" "I'm a Calvinist, so I chose this line." "Oh, you chose this line, did you?" came the reply. "If you're so into choosing, you need to go to the other line." The Calvinist trudges sadly to the back of the other line and waits for what feels like an eternity before getting to the front of the line. Again the person behind the desk asks, "Why are you here?" "Someone told me to go here." More of an insult than a joke, but describing someone as "you're on top of the bell curve" is always amusing to me. A plateau is the highest form of flattery. Werner Heisenberg, Kurt Gödel, and Noam Chomsky walk into a bar. Heisenberg turns to the other two and says, "Clearly this is a joke, but how can we figure out if it's funny or not?" Gödel replies, "We can't know that because we're inside the joke." Chomsky says, "Of course it's funny, you're just telling it wrong." "I'm dumb. I don't get it." Heisenberg is known for his uncertainty principle. Gödel is famous for his incompleteness theorem, roughly can't verify the objective truth of a system from within it. Finally, Chomsky is probably the world's most famous linguist. A computer scientist, a physicist and a mathematician are given the task to fence the maximal area in with a given set of fence. The computer scientist fences in a circle because he remembers that a circle is the shape with the maximum area per circumference. The physicist laughs and says, "That's because you stare on the flat screen all day. You only think in 2D," and promptly fences his circle around the tallest hill he can find. The mathematician thinks for a while. Then he fences himself in and says, "I define that I'm outside." I read this on Reddit in college 10 years ago, and I think about it when problem solving in group games. It's all about the definitions. Pavlov is in the bar with his friends, celebrating the publication of his paper. They're drinking and having a good time, when suddenly the bar phone rings and Pavlov jumps up and says, "Oh shit, I forgot to feed the dogs." People who confuse entomology and etymology bug me in a way I can't put into words. Two economists are out hiking together. They've had a few drinks, and they're laughing and joking with each other when they pass a pile of horse shit. One of the economists says to the other, "Hey, bet you're too chicken to eat that horse shit for 100. The second economist calls his bet and eats the horse shit, and the first economist hands over a 100 bill. They continue hiking, and the first economist is teasing the second economist now, calling him a shit eater. They come across a second pile of horse shit and the second economist says, "Hey, if you're so tough, why don't you eat this pile of horse shit for 100? Bet you're too chicken." The first economist calls his bet and eats the horse shit. As the second economist digs into his wallet and hands back the first economist back that same 100 bill, he realizes what they've just done. "I don't feel like we really achieved anything eating all this horse shit," he says. "That's not true," says the first economist. "We just added 200 to the GDP and created 2 new jobs." Two cats are sitting on an angled roof. Which one falls off first? The one with the smaller mew. Jean-Paul Sartre is at a cafe in Paris, and he orders a coffee with no cream. The waitress returns a minute later, apologizing. "I'm sorry, we're out of cream. Would you like a coffee without milk instead?" Reminds me of my favorite joke. Q. What's red and invisible? A. No tomatoes. Before studying engineering, if someone asked me what 1 + 1 is, I would have said 2. Now, I'd say I'm pretty sure it's 2. But we'd better make it 3 just to be safe. An infinite number of mathematicians walk into a bar. The first orders 1 beer. The second orders half a beer. The third a quarter of a beer. The bartender pours 2 beers and says, "You guys really need to learn your limits." How to tell the difference between a chemist and a plumber? Ask them to pronounce unionized. I for one like Roman numerals. A Roman walks into a bar and hold up his index finger and middle finger. 5 beers please. The bartender says, "Will that be all?" The Roman says I'd also like a Martinez. The bartender says Martinez. Do you mean martini? The Roman says, if I wanted to, I would have asked for two. A machine learning algorithm walks into a bar. The bartender says, what'll you have? The algorithm says, what's everyone else having? How many Freudians does it take to screw in a light bulb? 2. 1 to screw in the bulb, and 1 to hold the cock. Edit father. Edit to ladder. I would tell you a joke about UDP, but you might not get it. That joke got me a job once in an interview. Except I said I don't know if you would get it. Who is this Rorschach guy? And why did he paint so many pictures of my parents fighting? There are two types of people, those who can extrapolate from incomplete data. There are two things all programmers hate. Compilation errors. Runtime errors. Off by 1 errors. That is correct. Because arrays start at 0. Some languages let you use negative array indexes. But I stop at nothing to avoid them. Some types of construction work are more interesting than others. Enlarging a drilled hole is boring. But fastening bits of metal together is riveting. 1 beer please. A Tachian walks in a bar. After the funeral, one man stands up to give the eulogy. He says plethora, and sits down. Thank you, says the widow. That means a lot. Eanes. Zweri. Dreddy. FNF. Tom said fearlessly. I heard that as what did Freud say was between fear and sex. FNF. Walk into my Greek tailor's, hand him a pair of pants. He says Euripides. I say, yeah, humanides. Here's a similar one. Knock knock. Who's there? Euripides. Euripides who? Euripides pants. You better pay for them. What has 4 letters? Sometimes has 9 letters. Always has 6 letters. But never has 5 letters. Me, did you know that Albert Einstein was a real person? Them, yes. Of course. Me-o. I always thought that he was a theoretical physicist. Them rolls eyes. Did you know photons have mass? I didn't even know they were Catholic. Young Heisenberg gets caught speeding. The police officer asks him, do you know how fast you were going? No. But I know exactly where I am. Heisenberg, Skrodina and Omar in a car. Link. They get pulled over. Heisenberg is driving, and the cop asks him, do you know how fast you were going? No. But I know exactly where I'm. Heisenberg replies. The cop says you were doing 55 in a 35. Heisenberg throws up his hands and shouts, great. Now I'm lost. The cop thinks this is suspicious and orders him to pop open the trunk. He checks it out and says, do you know you have a dead cat back here? We do now. Asshole, shouts Skrodina. The cop moves to arrest them. Ohm resists. A programmer's wife sends him to the store. Buy a gallon of milk, and if they have eggs get a dozen, she says. The programmer comes back with a dozen gallons of milk. Why would you buy a dozen gallons of milk? The wife angrily asks. The programmer replies. They had eggs. Q. What do you get if you cross a mosquito and a mountain climber? A nothing. You can't cross a vector and a scalar. I first heard this as a follow-on to this. Q. What do you get when you cross an elephant and a grape? A relevant grapes in theta. A dairy farmer wasn't happy with the milk yield from his cows, so he asked a local university for some help on how to increase yield. The university's physics department took up the challenge, and after a few weeks of intense deliberation, the head of department came back to the farmer. I have a solution to your problem. Assume the cow is a sphere in a perfect vacuum. A spherical cow has become an idiom in physics, and probably also other sciences, denoting an overly idealized assumption or model. Yo mama is so massive. I can see the people standing behind her. Rendeskets walks into a bar and orders a beer. When he has finished, the barman asks him if he'd like another. He replies, I think not. He vanishes. The way I heard it was, a horse walks into a bar and orders a drink. The bartender asks if he'd like another. He replies, I think not, and suddenly disappears. See, Rendeskets was the philosopher who said, I think, therefore I am. I could have explained that first. but that would have been putting descants before the horse. Reminder of the best time this was used in the wild. Link is an adult actress in C0S5W6T. What's the difference between a seal and a celion? The celion is missing a valence electron. A photon is going through airport security. That SAT agent asks if he has any luggage, to which the photon replies, "No, I'm traveling light." Q. What is Benoit B. Mandelbrot's middle name? A. Benoit B. Mandelbrot. Q. What's an anagram of Banach-Tarski? A. Banach-Tarski. A statistician's doctor tells him, "I'm afraid the tests have confirmed that you had diabetes. Type 1. He says, "Thank God. I was worried I had diabetes." Two men walk into a bar. The first man asks for H2O. The second asks for H2O2. The second man dies. I now realize that joke doesn't really work as well as text. Want to hear a word I just made up? Plagiarism. From Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk. What's so unpleasant about being drunk? You ask a glass of water. Is it solipsistic here? Or is it just me? A physicist, a biologist, and a chemist get high at the beach together. The physicist finds himself utterly fascinated by the waves and wanders into the water. He notes how the top layer of the water moves, notices the changes in temperature, goes deeper as he gets more interested, and disappears into the waves. Meanwhile, the biologist is into the sand. Some of these grains of sand are actually bits of shell, and there are animals, and he, too, wanders into the water to look at all the different animals in their habitats. The chemist sits on the beach vibing on his edible and waiting for them to come back. Finally, the sun goes down. He scribbles into his notebook. Physicists and biologists are soluble in water. Day 1 have invented the universal solvent. Day 2 must now invent insoluble beaker in which to keep universal solvent. It's hard to explain puns to kleptomaniacs because they always take things literally. Einstein, Newton, and Pascal are playing hide and seek when Einstein starts counting, Pascal runs and hides while Newton quickly draws a 1x2 box on the ground around him. When Einstein finishes counting, he turns around and sees Newton. Einstein exclaims he found Newton, but Newton interjects with, "No, I'm 1 Newton over 1m2. Therefore you have found Pascal." 3 statisticians logicians walk into a bar. "Would all of you like a beer?" asks the bartender. "I don't know," says the first statistician logician. "I don't know," says the second one. "Yes," says the third one. A veterinarian walks out of the operating room and says, "Mr. Scrodina, about your cat. I have good news and bad news." There are 3 men on a train. One of them is an economist, and one of them is a logician, and one of them is a mathematician. And they have just crossed the border into Scotland. I don't know why they are going to Scotland, and they see a brown cow standing in a field from the window of the train, and the cow is standing parallel to the train. And the economist says, "Look, the cows in Scotland are brown." And the logician says, "No, there are cows in Scotland of which at least one is brown." And the mathematician says, "No, there is at least one cow in Scotland, of which one side appears to be brown." A Roman walks into a bar and holds up 2 fingers, 5 beers. He says, "An Australian man wins a trip to Boston. His mates have been telling him how good the seafood is in Boston, and he can't wait to hit some restaurants. He arrives and, after freshening up at the hotel, wanders out to catch a taxi and hopefully be directed to a decent seafood place. Unbeknownst to him, his cab driver is a postgrad student going for his doctorate in linguistics and grammatical syntax. The Aussie says, 'Hey, mate, where could I get Scroddlink?' The cab driver turns to him with a look of intellectual curiosity and replies, 'Sir, I have heard it asked for in many ways, shapes and forms, but I've never heard it in the pluperfect subjunctive before.'" Karl Marx and Adam Smith are on a boat. Karl Marx falls into the water. Who pushed him? The invisible hand. A horse walks into a bar. The bartender says, why the long face? And the horse replies, because I'm a metaphorical construct in a hypothetical situation, and will cease to exist at the end of this joke, and vanishes. Two fish are swimming next to each other and an older wiser fish swims towards them and jokingly says, hey boys, how's the water? They laugh for a moment and continued on. Then after a minute one fish looks to the other and says, what's water? My flatmate rolled my to-do list into a joint and smoked it. You could say he is high on my list of priorities. Two atoms are walking down the street towards each other. They bump into each other. One atom says, I think I lost an electron. The other atom asks, are you sure? The first atom replies, yes, I'm positive. I think if two atoms are bumping into each other, they've got bigger problems.